All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for jumping on. Today, I have the Chief Revenue Officer of MTM, Greg Turner. MTM is a disruption solution provider, and he's going to be talking to us today about MTM and disruption in the IT space. Greg, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. So, wanted to kick things off, kind of start a little high level, and kind of learn a little more about your business. So, I know as a disruption solution provider, oftentimes people are coming to you when there is a disruption in the marketplace. So, would love to hear your insight on like what are some signs within a business vertical that leads to a disruption in that marketplace.
Sure. So, in many cases, what we mean today by the words disruption, there could be lots of, steam power was a disruption, 300 years ago, right? There's all kinds of things that happen, usually through some kind of technological innovation. And today we have a combination, a convergence, if you will, of a lot of technologies. Things like artificial intelligence, the IoT, the Internet of Things, digital transformation, cloud computing, just some tremendous innovations in data storage and data capacity and speed of access to data. And so all of these things together have created tremendous opportunities to move direct to the consumer, direct to the customer, and provide a lot of functionality for the consumer to self-serve. And so, real quick examples, right? Uber, in terms of, ride sharing and limousine service and taxi service. Netflix, in terms of entertainment and media. Just to name two obvious ones. Amazon itself has created, and you and I have talked before in the past, Anthony, about how many days do you open up the newspaper and read about, franchises, names that you grew up with, stores that are closing, and numbers of stores across the country because the retail space has been disrupted because of this direct-to-consumer phenomenon through all of these convergence of technologies. And so businesses that are most susceptible to disruption are those that are typically in the middle of a process. And so in many cases, the middleman was, crucial to success of getting a process completed. They managed the inventory, or they managed all the paperwork. And now, because of these disruptive technologies and the convergence of all these technologies coming together, many of the things that the middleman, the middle, market processing could do is now being done either directly by the consumer or is being done as a result of algorithms and key indicators that are analyzed through artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to be able to formulate the response that might have been, needed to require several hundreds of hours of manpower to review, evaluate, and create an answer. So I think across multiple verticals, across multiple industry sectors, disruption really can occur if there's been enough interest in taking the actions directly to the consumer, to that end customer, and creating innovative solutions using the technology today. And finally, the last point is, because of these technologies, a lot of it is very easy to iteratively develop and deploy. And so years ago, it would take months and months and years and thousands of man-years of development work to create an application system. Today, smartphone apps, as an example, can be developed in just literally a few days worth of effort, including development, testing, deployment, and publication to a Google store or Apple store near you. And so I think the whole momentum has created this faster to market approach, direct to consumer, and so we're getting tremendous disruption across all markets today.
Wow, that's awesome. And with these disruptors coming in, how is that affecting the business place? Like that obviously creates an opportunity for something like MTM to come into place. Where are some of those opportunities arising?
Sure. So many organizations recognize that they are being disruptive, or they're very strategic. The organizations that we work with are strategic, and they recognize that maybe they're not being completely disrupted today, but they want to hedge against future disruptions and recognize that things are changing, and that they may be in a very old-fashioned industry, and they would recognize that, well, disruption is going to probably take a long time to get here, but it will get here. And so when it does, we want to be prepared for it. So a lot of organizations that I work with and MTM works with, we talk to the customers and our clients to understand what are their plans for digital transformation, right? How can they take advantage of these new technologies, the convergence of all these technologies, to better position them to not be taken out of the equation, especially if they're somewhat of a value-added provider in the middle. And so how do we create solutions for them to enable them to have longevity in the marketplace, or help them to transition to a new business model? And we've worked with companies like that as well. So it really depends on how strategic they are, but in other cases it's in response to crisis, right? So we're losing market share, we're losing access to our customers, our supply chain is changing drastically, and so we have to respond, and we have to respond quickly. How quickly can we create a solution that addresses these business challenges? And so that might be another reason for a service provider like MTM to come in and help.
Okay. Yeah. And since there's a lot of urgency sometimes, when you're working with clients, how are you identifying these business impacts that these disruptors are having?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And certainly we come from the technology transformation place, right? And so we're providing solutions to help our clients address disruption. So usually it's not us that's actually drawing the impacts or concluding what the impacts are, but we're working with our client organizations, and they're very insightful as to what's affecting their marketplace. And it's usually based on, solid economic indicators, right? Their market share, their revenue, their profitability, their cost of customer acquisition, and so forth. And just looking at their own business performance, they can indicate, oh yeah, this is a major variance from what it was 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and then evaluate that's the impact, right? So it's a loss of revenue, loss of profitability, maybe an increase in cost, and so now what do we do about it? So we usually work with our customers, and they give us the guidance and direction on how they see the impact, and then we just try to work with them in a number of ways. We have some defined solutions that can help them save some money in terms of operating costs, and improve services, and create foundational improvements in their infrastructure to enable more digitization and digital transformation. But we want to work with our clients on whatever projects they think is the most crucial and most rewarding for their business model.
Absolutely. And definitely like with these types of projects, as you're collaborating with them and working with them, it's always important to make sure that you're proving your value every day. So can you kind of like speak on how a service provider would deliver excellent collaboration with clients and provide value on a daily basis so that way they see these impacts?
Sure. So most IT contracts, especially for recurring services, tend to be multi-year contracts, and in many cases, it's working with legal teams from both the service provider as well as the client to try to create, all of these conditions that protect each side. And that's obviously important, and from fiduciary responsibilities to your shareholders and board of directors and customers and the like, you want to make sure that you're not putting your company at risk, whether you're the service provider or the client. However, one of the things that we've seen in our experience is the notion of collaboration yields probably the higher outcome for both parties. And so it really takes a look at what contracting is all about. And what we're trying to do is establish a partnership, not a transaction, right? So what we want to be to that organization is, you can count on us for just about anything. And if we don't have the answer, we'll find somebody that does, because that's what a partner does for you. And a partner can represent you when you're not in the room. And so we want to make sure that we have that kind of trusted relationship first with our clients, and they have that same trust in us. But when you create collaborative contracts, what you're doing is you're looking for gain sharing opportunities for both parties, and you're versus looking for penalties to be incurred by both parties, right? So it's just a different way of looking at it, and the way you structure the contract. And often today, IT providers work off of things called service level agreements, and so we guarantee that 95% of the time we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and if we don't do that, at least 90% of the time, you can charge us a penalty of X, dollars per month up to a certain limit, right? Well, it really provides this, be perfect all the time, and if you ever make a mistake, we're gonna, wrap your knuckles with the ruler model. And instead, and so what you get is maybe an operational performance, right? But you may lose out on creativity and innovation. And so in creating a collaboration agreement, you're really looking for the gain sharing to say, please operate from a performance perspective that is responsible. It is best practices, right? But, if you can create savings, right? Or if you can create innovation and solve, customer service issues through a better service desk platform, or providing innovation through maybe machine learning or artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. If you can create value to your client, that should be more encouraged than penalizing them if they didn't, alert somebody in 15 minutes or less on a severity 1 type problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting topic you brought up. Specifically, I don't think IT contracts are a conversation that's brought up, especially when it comes to delivering excellent collaboration. So I'd love if you could just like dive a little bit deeper and explain like how an IT contract can be an example of delivering excellent collaboration, and how that kind of value can be showed to the client as a result of that.
Yeah, I'll try my best. And part of my, model that we look at contracting is based on the work of an economist, John Nash, famous for the movie Beautiful Mind, and he developed game theory equilibrium models and talked about different conditions. But there was one of his studies that talked about collaboration, and when you look at IT contracting that goes on today, there's really about 4 cases, right? The first case is I'm a vendor, a provider of a service, and I think one size fits all, right? And this is how we respond to every request for service. And another case is the customer says, this is the maximum I'm going to pay for any service that looks like this. And I'm going to issue an RFP that addresses, just that, right? That very narrowly defined, narrowly costed service model. So that's case 1. Case 2 is the vendor is willing to be collaborative, wants to be flexible, wants to try to create gain sharing, maybe opportunities, or at least looking at the problem a little differently. But the client insists on this is the maximum cost we're going to pay for this service, narrowly defined. The other side of the equation is the customer is willing to be open-minded and look for innovation, look for new ideas, but the vendor says one size fits all, it's got to look like this. I think you can tell that when you look at those cases, certainly when one side is inflexible, right, you're not going to get a very good solution. You're going to get something that basically makes somebody worse off, right? So when the vendor is inflexible, the client automatically thinks, hey, I'm unique. And now you're not willing to meet my unique needs with this one-size-fits-all contract. Conversely, when the client is inflexible and says, this is it, we've done the work, this is the cost we're willing to pay, and it's narrowly defined for this, what then happens is that the vendor is never going to be really incented to provide innovation or better services because they're going to be so focused on making profitability at a very low margin basis all the time. And it won't create opportunities for success for both parties. Lastly, if the one choice where they both are narrowly defined, one's inflexible, one's very inflexible on cost, if for some reason those two create an equilibrium, they create a match, how successful is that going to be really? Because both parties don't value the other party. And so it really is a transaction. Take that and contrast it to a collaborative state where both parties work together and actually define their success functions. So what's a success for the supplier of the service and what's a success for the buyer of the service? And what are long-term successes and short-term successes? And by both parties collaboratively identifying that and sharing full disclosure of information. So the client shares everything they can about their operation, how they did things in the past, how they operate today, and the vendor of the service provides full disclosure of how they solve these problems, what types of resources they use, and what is their measurement for best practices in terms of how many hours per incident or how many hours per item, whatever it may be, right? For lines of code, as an example. when full disclosure and full collaboration come together, then you have an opportunity to create a true collaborative agreement with gain sharing opportunities for both parties that really foster innovation and growth, and it's a real partnership. And so that's kind of how, we're looking to create that model with all of our clients. We've been around for over 30 years, and we clearly have examples of all those contracts that I described. Some, where we were inflexible, some where the client was inflexible. But we also have ones where we've created some true collaboration. We think those are really the opportunities for success. And lastly, Anthony, I don't want to forget your one point is, how do you demonstrate that every day? Well, I think that really depends on that collaboration, the trust you have for both parties. But one of the things that I find that is really debilitating for both the vendor of the service provider as well as the client is when there are penalties for early termination, right? Because what that says is, look, business is dynamic, right? The world is dynamic. There's things changing all the time. And at no fault of anyone's, this contract may have to be canceled. The nature of these termination clauses is there's some kind of fault involved, and there may not be, and yet a penalty ensues. Now, a lot of times people will try to negotiate those after the fact, after the idea of terminating has come out. But the point is, why not build a contract and a solution delivery framework that allows the customer to stay because they want to stay, right? That it's the best solution for them, not because they have to stay because of a penalty. And so we try to, focus on delivering of services that, just enrich the experience for the customer so they want to stay, that there is no other better off solution for them than being right here, right now. And so it's a philosophy, but it's also a concept of, let's not add in the penalties when things are dynamic at no fault of their own.
I love that. And I totally in agreement. I think when people are so cagey and want or don't expose themselves to open to this collaboration, working together for a common solution, a common goal, I think it's really limiting on both parties, and yet it becomes very transactional. And I think in the end, it's not, and nobody benefits from this.
Right.
You kind of touched a little bit on how it's important to not only be collaborative and give them opportunities to want to stay within the clause. And because of the collaboration, it sounds like each contract needs to be a little different. So can you dive a little deeper, kind of on the flip side, as to why having the same contract with every partner could lead to less collaboration and, even worse, a failed partnership?
Sure. So, I think, from a standpoint of contracting, it could be just as simple as the business model, right? Depending on the nature of the customer and what they do. So in a healthcare model, as an example, healthcare hospital, let's take as an example, 24/7, urgent response required when when a major medical system is down. That could actually be life-threatening. If a doctor is not able, a surgeon is not able to get information about the patient while they're operating, right? And so, so the conditions by which severities are, developed for that client are completely different than an organization that might be, generally operates, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and does all their business, during normal working hours, and they're not saving lives, right? They're just, it's just general commerce. So the severity levels and conditions may be completely different, right? And so, that's just a quick example of, if I have one contract, one size fits all, one of those guys is going to be disadvantaged, right? And by that, I mean the individuals, let's say everything was based on the healthcare model, right? Then the cost to deliver the healthcare model is more expensive than it would be to, the 8x5 model, right? And so the one size fits all says that guy's got to pay more for the same service that somebody else is willing to pay because their business requires it. So that's the best way to describe where the one size doesn't work, and then I think it would lead to it would lead to no collaboration, because the client who is and frankly, a good example is insurance rates, right, for cars. If you think about it, right, it's based on the the driving history of all the drivers, right, and the actuarial tables. And so you're paying a higher insurance rate in some states and some territories because of the history of other drivers in that territory, right? It has nothing to do with your experience and how good a driver you are, Anthony, but that's what the insurance you're going to pay. Well, nobody thinks that's fair, but we just live with it because that's the model of insurance. But in IT, that would really lead to people feeling like, I don't feel this is fair. And so if they don't feel it's fair, how much of a partner are they going to consider the service provider? And if they're, and if that creates that kind of distrust, right, you're never going to have true collaboration, and you're not going to be able to both look for gain sharing opportunities and creating innovation.
Awesome.
Does that answer the question? I know that was really
No, that was great. I think those are all awesome examples. So I think we're coming towards the end of our interview, but I want to make sure, is there any other topics you wanted to touch on or like highlight more in terms of IT contracting? I think that, again, it's a fantastic example and something that isn't talked about enough.
Yeah, sure. Just one quick thing is, one of the things we're also looking at is, a lot of contracts are developed based on a snapshot in time. And one of the things we're looking at is a longer term horizon. So, some contracts are for recurring services, so they're multi-year type arrangements. But there's also, because of disruption, as we talked about earlier, there's these what we call transformational projects that occur. And these transformational projects are, could be enterprise-wide initiatives, creating a lot of organizational change management, new systems, and requires a lot of human capital to make it happen. One of the things, and so a perfect course of action is I'll work with partners that are really good on transformational projects, and I'll work with partners that are really good on recurring operational activities, and I'll have separate projects, separate contracts, and we'll just get it done. That's one approach. Certainly nothing wrong with it. It's worked, right? But if you look at the enterprise and what they're spending, what you'll see is that over time they're spending roughly the same amount for IT operations, as an example, and then they have these spikes in payments related to these transformational projects. If we could put those together and create, kind of an amortized version of all IT spend, including projects, and we could reduce the cost of the IT operation standpoint so as to fund the transformational projects to some degree, not necessarily all of it, but to some degree, we could create, a contracting model that creates both sets of solutions under one financial engine and provides savings, both in operational savings and net present value, because now if I smooth out my costs over time, and I'm not paying so much up front to do these transformational projects, right? I have better cash flow. And, cash in my pocket is of higher value than cash in somebody else's pocket. So that's something we're also looking at, is creating what we call disruptive or disruption economics of contracting, and creating a model that allows our clients to take advantage of more of a consumption model for both the IT and transformational projects over time, and have more predictive cash flows, and have savings that help pay for those transformational projects.
Awesome. Sounds like a good application for some game theory for these types of economics.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Greg, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for taking the time to be interviewed and showing up on our channel. Look forward to talking more in the future. And if there's any last minute things you want to say to the world, now's your chance.
No, great. Just thanks for having us. It was a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak with you today. Thank you, Anthony.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Greg. You have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.